Welcome to the latest Knoca Learning Call. Really delighted to be talking today about the National Climate Assembly that happened in the Netherlands. My terrible Dutch, everyone can laugh at me, the Nationaal Burgerberaad, but it happened already, Burgerberaad Klimaat, which ran from January to September last year. It ran over 6 weekends and plus a Saturday, so one of the longest of the assemblies we've seen to date. And they were responding to the task, how can we, as the Netherlands, eat, use things and travel in a way that is better for the climate? So food, consumption and transport. It was commissioned by the Ministries of Climate and Green Growth and of the Interior and Kingdom Relations on behalf of the whole Dutch government. It was as far as I'm aware, it was the largest climate assembly we've seen to date with 175 members. And it launched its report on the 1st of December, presenting it to the outgoing Prime Minister and ministers. One of the things that we'll pick up on this call is during this process, I think that my count is there's been 3 different governments from the conception of the process. So that's an interesting insight in its own right. They generated 23 proposals, which again, coming from 175 members is a small number of proposals. So it's very focused, with 13 of them receiving over 75% support. And I think it's fair to say for an assembly, this has received significant media and political attention. We thought unusually we would actually play a short video. They've got a kind of a mood video, I think is the phrase, just a short video clip to give you a sense of what the assembly looked like. So Mark and colleagues, can you just play that video? That wasn't entirely smooth, but I think it gave you a flavour. gave you a flavour of what was going on. One thing I forgot to mention, sorry, is that we're recording this, but you will not be seen unless you're spotlighted. So don't worry about that. So today I'm joined by 5 people who have been intimately involved in the assembly in different ways. Tobijn de Graauw, who is the programme lead for the assembly. Yannick Wassmer, who is the lead facilitator. Nienke Meijer, who's the independent chair. Casper Weekhout, who is an assembly member, and Marvin Tiemessen, who is from the Ministry of Climate Policy and Green Growth. And unusually for a Knoca call, I'm actually going to invite 3 people into the initial conversation, Tobijn, Yannick and Nienke. And the reason I've done that is because when I started to try and set the questions for this, I realized that they each had insights into each other's work. And I think they've really worked as a team on this project. So if we can bring the 3 of them into the space, that would be fantastic. Are we going to have Tobijn? Is she coming? There we go. There we go. So before we start, I just want to say, because I have, as will be clear, I've kind of followed this process from its very early days, and it's been really impressive. So first of all, much respect to you. I'm also noticing that my video is slightly slow, which is slightly irritating. I'm really sorry. I hope that doesn't put you off. So I was clarifying, we had the programme lead and the lead facilitator, so Tobijn and Yannick. That's quite normal for an assembly. But there was a chair, which is a slightly unusual position. Most assemblies don't have them, but when they do have them in Ireland, very often they lead the facilitation of the assembly. But Nienke, that wasn't your role. Can you just explain briefly why were you there? What were you doing?
Yes,
What was
well,
your
thank you, Graham, and thank you for your nice introduction. Well, my role was especially that I was the independent chair. And the main thing is that I was, and actually I am, really independent. So I don't have a political or a governmental background. And that I could safeguard that the whole assembly could stay independent and there were no influences whatsoever. And that all perspectives were heard. So all the voices were there in the room, but also all the voices outside were heard. And so we really could act independent. And I think that was one of the most important things in such a polarized and very complicated political environment.
Okay, we'll come back to the polarization some more,
Yeah.
I think, in it, and the political environment in a second. So, as I said, the assembly was a long time coming. I think I and Knoca were talking to Dutch civil servants back in 2022. So I think it's fair to say this is the longest run up to a citizens' assembly. And so I'm kind of interested, why do you think it took so long to come to fruition? And was that actually helpful for you having that time? So Tobijn, do you want to pick that one up? Oh, we can't hear you. Someone's always got to do that.
I think now you can hear me. Thanks,
Yeah.
Graham. It's really nice to be in this conversation with you. Yeah, so I think the ministries invested a great deal of time and energy up front. So they really thought through the process and worked hard to ensure that both government, cabinet, and parliament jointly agreed on the purpose of the assembly and the main question, and key conditions, including also commitment to political follow-up. And how they would cooperate throughout the process. So they really took their time, and Parliament had its own independent working group. They also researched if we do it, how do we make sure we do it right. But then, as the Assembly was formally established in the summer of 23, about the same week, the government collapsed. So that caused a delay. And that meant that after the elections, we had to brief the newly elected government and parliament and engage the new cabinet all over again to ensure there was still sufficient political support. So I think as an organization, we were only really able to really get started in late spring of 24. So that's why we started later. And in hindsight, I think it was helpful and gave us, in terms of being able to prepare, it gave us time to think ahead, to learn from other citizens' assemblies, both locally in the Netherlands, the one that had been done in 2006, but also, of course, learning from international experiences through Knoca. We've learned a lot, and we could carefully design the governance structure, the setup of the meetings, the sortition process. And I think it allowed us to engage different stakeholders from early stage in a process. From public authorities who we needed to actually execute or set up the sortition process, which was very new here in the Netherlands, but also civil servants across different departments, academics, helping us think through what would a scientific advisory group look like, what role could it take, what expertise do you need in that group for this question, stuff like that. And then at the same time, it was only when we received the formal request and we could actually start the real work after the elections and the renewed commitment. It was only then that we could start the actual work and convene a team. Nienke, our chair, was appointed, and only then I think we had like 5 months before the 70,000 invitations were supposed to land on the doormats across the Netherlands. So then still it felt like we had a long run up, but we had to work really hard, deliver a huge amount of work in a very short time.
And put a team together and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff as well, right? Okay, so you knew it was coming, but you couldn't actually press go.
Exactly.
Okay. So Nienke mentioned it was a really politically challenging environment when you actually organised the assembly, including, if I remember rightly, halfway through, there was almost like there was a vote in Parliament to shut down the process. Can you give us a sense of of the kind of challenges you were facing and how you navigated them?
Yeah, I think after the very first assembly meeting, the leader of the largest political party, and at that time one of the four coalition partners, posted on X that the assembly's advice could go straight into the bin. And indeed, after the second meeting, as you just mentioned, there were votes in Parliament to shut down the process altogether. And then just a few weeks, we moved forward to June, just a few weeks before what was supposed to be our final assembly meeting. The government collapsed again. And then 2 months later, part of the caretaker cabinet stepped down. So by now, we have dealt with, or the Assembly has dealt with, 3 different governments, as you mentioned in your introduction, and we're about to meet the 4th Minister of Interior involved in this process. So I think that perhaps illustrates a bit how politically turbulent it has been. And in that context, I think what we've tried to do is really invest heavily in maintaining and sometimes rebuilding political commitments. So we continuously reached out to politicians from all political parties. We had bi-monthly meetings with our chair, like progress meetings with the politically responsible ministers and parliamentary rapporteurs that were assigned. And we repeatedly invited members of parliament, new members of parliament, and the ministers to attend the assembly meetings. And when they didn't show up, or when it was difficult for them to attend the assembly meetings in the weekends, we decided if they don't come to us, we'll go to them. So a group of participants came together, a group of assembly members, and we went to The Hague, and we had this great conversation in parliament with members of parliament. So yeah, assembly members could share their experiences with them. And also when government collapsed, as I just mentioned, right before the last assembly meeting, we had a conversation in that final assembly meeting, like how to deal with this. And we decided to adjust our plans. The assembly decided to not launch and to postpone the launch of their advice until after the elections, so that the newly elected parliament with a fresh mandate could actually receive it. And yeah, so these were that's I think how we dealt with that.
But so there was a lot. I mean, I think we've been stressing this over the last sort of 3 or 4 years in Knoca. There's been a lot of political work around the assembly. A lot of your time has been taken up managing those relationships and not just kind of focusing on the assembly itself.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I think, yeah, and it, of course, it also affected the members of the assembly, all this political turbulence or the changing environments. And some wondered, like, whether their work would be taken seriously. And I think, interestingly, it also had a positive effect on the assembly, because it strengthened their sense of purpose. There was this feeling of, this really matters. Perhaps it matters even more now. In the middle of this political instability, our voice and the voice of society matters more than ever. And it created some kind of pride and solidarity. And our members said, like, if 175 very different people with completely different backgrounds from across the Netherlands, we don't agree at all, but if we can work together constructively, then we're sure that 150 members of parliament can do the same.
Yeah, that was I think that was my favorite line from the assembly. Actually, you've neatly moved me to Yannick, actually, in terms, because Yannick was the person who was dealing with these 175. Well, not, I mean, you all were, but Yannick was the lead facilitator on that. So Yannick, this is the largest, as far as I'm aware, climate assembly that's ever been gathered. I think it's fair to say, as we were talking, it's happening in a very polarized political context. I think some of that polarization was well represented in the assembly itself. So I'm kind of interested how you manage such large numbers and such differences in opinion, especially as you also were very focused on trying to create a small number of focused focused recommendations, which is actually quite unusual because a lot of assemblies, usually the number of recommendations is pretty much the same as the number of members. So I'm kind of interested. So what was your kind of, how did you approach that kind of challenge? That sounds really quite something to be dealing with.
Thanks, Graham. Yes, I think your question has a couple of different layers. So let me try to unpack them a bit separately, and hopefully the story that comes out is somewhat coherent. Just a little caveat up front. Like for me, this is like I could spend like hours and hours talking about the approach and stuff, right? So this is going to be just a small snippet, but I guess a couple of key points. Just on a general level, I think we always operated from a general philosophy that you can do full-on participatory work with 175 people, like period. And so we trusted that, and we kept doing that. So that meant that we would always open in circle, like always open up in circle, not us on the stage and the people in theater sitting in front of us or even below us, right? And I guess like that sounds like just a simple move, but it's quite fundamental to how we operated, because I think from the get-go, it showed the assembly that this was their process, that leadership rotates, that it's not a process that they participate in, but it's actually their process. And so through all of the facilitation, every move that we made, it was always focused on how can we create the conditions for them to do their best work, right? And I guess a lot of the stuff that we did from the beginning was focusing on building the listening capacity in the group, helping folks to think about how do we collaborate first. And I think, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, but we really focused on building the relational container first before we got into the content. And I'll zoom into that a little bit more when we talk about polarization and stuff. But I guess in everything that we did, we operated from an understanding and a philosophy that the citizens are the experts, right? Like it is not if the solution to this issue would have been more technical expertise or more academia, no offense, to sit together and think this stuff through, we would have solved everything already, right? But that's not happening. So to really focus on their lived experience and center their wisdom, I think that was really just a general principle in all of that. And I guess there was just in our whole team, both the organizing team and the facilitation team, just a deeply rooted belief that if you're working on complex challenges, collective wisdom is the only thing you can work with. And so that was constantly the focus of our attention. And so we constantly were working with how do we bring in diversity of perspectives in the room. And I guess that kind of bridges a bit to the quite significant level of polarization and polarities that we had in the room. And so just for folks to understand, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, but I think it's not always the case that in a climate assembly, in the sortition process, in this specific assembly, we ask people about their opinion on climate. And we really had the wide range of perspectives in the room, from very, very, very climate skeptic people to some of the folks who are most worried and everything in between. And so we were also representative on that in terms of how it is arranged in the Netherlands. So, and so I guess the philosophy here for us was always that diversity of perspective is the solution and not the problem. And so we really, we leaned into it, we embraced it, and we saw it as like the potential for an undiscovered wisdom. So it wasn't something that we tried to shy away from or to dampen, but it's something that we brought to the surface every time. And I guess that's that was the core philosophy, to constantly look at different perspectives, normalize that folks have different perspectives, and to actively seek out voices of dissent, and to see what is it that we can learn from that. And so that philosophy wasn't only part of the instructions for the facilitation team, and so that everybody, like all the facilitators, we worked with a group of 24 facilitators, and so that in all the conversations they would constantly look at like, all right, but who has a different perspective, who has something new for us to see, but it was also part of the larger design. So During the second weekend, we went on 27 field visits. We brought these 175 folks by buses through the Netherlands to the airport, to the harbor, to the train stations, all across the country. But we always organize it in a way that folks would experience different perspectives on the same challenge. So if they would look at the food system, they would have a more traditional perspective on the food system and a more regenerative, innovative kind of way. So to always normalize these different perspectives. And so I guess that was something, I think what we played with a lot was, how do you learn from differences and how do you build on similarities that you have? And you constantly play with that. And sometimes you want to actually amplify differences, right? Because that's where learning happens. That's where newness exists. However, sometimes you feel that there's so much difference in the room that you kind of want to bring folks together and actually focus on, but what do we have in common? And to artfully play with that, I think was something that really helped us to work with the different polarities in the room, I guess. And then maybe
sorry. No. I was just
I think maybe because you also mentioned something about the small number of recommendations, right? And so I guess the another thing that we did is that we design from the harvest or the outcome that we wanted. And so we always, we didn't know what the content of the outcome was supposed to be, but we knew what the type of outcome was that we were looking for. So we always knew that we wanted to work towards a set of recommendations that is both visionary and practical and implementable, right? And there's a tension between those. And so you design for that. And so constantly in the process, you design for that. And also because of some of your work and the work that we've learned from international examples, we knew that we were aiming for a set of recommendations that wasn't going to be 175. Tobijn constantly pushed us to say 15 or something like that, or around that. And so we had quite some interesting conversations in that as a team and some negotiations. And so the number of it wasn't dogmatic, but we operated from an idea that was something that we were working towards. And also, given the complexity of the challenge, we also wanted to work towards a set of interconnected recommendations, right? That are a story in of itself. And so we designed for that. And the other part was, I guess, is that throughout the process, we had different teams of assembly members working on different topics, and we'll speak a little bit more about that later as well. But we constantly did sense making throughout the process and pattern spotting, and we had different people with assembly members figure out what's the pattern here? What are we seeing here? What really matters given this specific topic that we're working on? So we try to converge that as much as possible and really hone in on the stuff that can really have an impact, I guess. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It's very, very impressive, I must say. The one way this issue around polarization particularly played out and generated quite an interesting innovation was the way that you actually democratized the knowledge curation, the way, the kind of information that people were getting. Can you tell us a little bit about the context for that and what you actually did? Because I think it's something in terms of the role that citizens had in choosing who they were going to hear from. I think yours has been a really taken practice forward further than I've seen before.
Thanks. I guess so. In order to answer that question, we need to zoom out a little bit, because I think there was, I think what we saw as the ultimate shape and form of participation is actually self-organization, right? And so what we tried to achieve was not folks participating in our process, but was around how can we create the conditions for self-organization to happen? And so one of the structures that we created was working with a team of teams, where we had different teams of assembly members. They could self-select and they would work on different topics in between meetings. So for example, we had a design team, and we would co-create or test the design that we had in mind with that specific design team. We had a theme that would focus on the red threads. So they would always look at what are the red threads in terms of working towards the recommendations. We had a team that co-created the public consultation with us. And I guess, but I'm also looking at Tobijn and Nienke, I guess we had about 10-ish teams throughout the whole journey, and I think about 90-ish people contributed, and so that's half of the assembly, roughly contributed to co-creating the assembly. And so during the first weekend, we figured out quite soon that knowledge was quite contested in this area, and I think that was something that we all underestimated. We had the director of the National Weather Institute coming, which I would say is it would be quite trustworthy from my limited background and perspective. However, that was there was quite some challenging on that knowledge, and that knowledge being seen as just one way of seeing it in a sense, right? And so we soon learned that knowledge was going to be quite contested and had a polarizing effect. And during the second weekend, as I said, we went on these field trips. And based on these field trips and the conversations folks had during the first weekend, we worked with the group to create certain knowledge profiles and to actually not focus on what specific name or expert are we looking for, but what's the type of expertise that we're looking for, right? And I think that was quite an important distinction, because on these three different topics, the group then created different profiles of people that they would like to invite into the assembly, both scientific expert, but also practitioners in the field, folks doing the work, etc. And so based on these knowledge profiles, they would actually start to invite folks into the assembly. And we did that with a team of assembly members, team knowledge. And we made sure, I think it was about 10 people, and we made sure that they were a very diverse group of people so that they were also trustworthy for the rest of the assembly. And together with our scientific advisory board, they then started looking, all right, if these are the knowledge profiles, what are the actual names and people that could fit into that? And that was quite an intense process between our second and our third weekend. It became quite heated. And however, what ended up happening was that during the third weekend, when we entered into our knowledge festival, there was quite a special moment, because it was the knowledge team from the assembly on stage that presented the program and the selection of experts. And given the contested profile, like the knowledge thing was so contested, I think that was a definite shift in the assembly, also in the trust relationship between the organization and the assembly members. So they had full ownership on who they invited into the room, and I think it was a great collaboration between the assembly members, the scientific board, and the organization in itself.
So was that, what was the reaction to some of that meant that some people came into the room who were out and out climate skeptics or climate deniers even. How was that received? How did you manage that kind of that tension?
And feel free to chime in as well, Nienke and Tobijn. But
I think Nienke and Tobijn are happy watching you deal with these difficult questions.
Sure. I'll go first, and then you'll come in. I guess so that had many different layers, right? Because we're also we are part of government, and so we have a responsibility to make sure that the knowledge that is being brought into the process is scientifically robust, etc., etc. However, there are other forms and shapes of knowledge within that the assembly members also thought was important. So that was quite how to say that? It was hard for us as a team to navigate that. In which role? What is our role? To what extent do we? To what extent do we move with the assembly members' wishes? To what extent do we need to hold our ground firmly? So I guess that was quite a hard space for us to navigate. But I guess at the end, what happened was that because it was decided by the assembly members themselves, I think that was the most important piece. And so I guess in the room, the assembly members were happy that there was diversity of different perspectives present. There was quite a tense and dense moment in between the weekends, working with the knowledge team and them wanting or suggesting a conversation a plenary conversation between the director of the Weather Institute and a more skeptic voice. And so we went through a whole process of inviting all of the assembly members to respond to a form, and then the result was that nobody was actually looking for a plenary conversation. And so that ended up not happening. But I guess the thing that we learned, and then I'll hand over to Tobijn and Nienke to say more, is to co-create this with the Assembly was a move of trust between the organization and the Assembly. And so I guess that allowed us to hold all of those different perspectives in the room, I guess.
Okay. I mean, I think I want to apologize again. I think my video might be a little bit slow, and there's nothing I can do. I think someone in my house has just switched on about 10 computers, I think. So I think the idea that the proposals for the knowledge were made from within the Assembly and then checked with the rest of the Assembly was a really neat move, and really very brave. Tobijn, let me bring you back in. Another innovation, or a couple of innovations you've had. One, I think you did a public survey. You had a children and youth summit, which fed in, which other assemblies have done, but I think is really important to hear that voice. But alongside that, you also had an impact assessment, which is slightly unusual. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that worked and how that has been helpful, if that's been helpful for you?
Yes. So we asked an independent research bureau to conduct an impact assessment and to first look at the draft recommendations and then at a later stage at the final recommendations and assess the impact or effect across several domains. So not just climate impact, but also economic impact and social and broader societal effects and environmental impacts. And there was also, we convened an advisory group consisting of civil servants and academics, also from the various national planning agencies or bureaus, to guide this work. And I think that, we are really happy with it. We think it worked really well because on the one hand, it informed the work of the Assembly members. It helped them, the impact assessment of the draft recommendations, it helped them refine their proposals, and because it gave them insight in the different trade-offs and consequences of different choices. And so it supported their further deliberation. But then also it was important to the outside world because it showed that the Assembly also had actually considered or taken these multiple perspectives and these different interests and fields into account in their deliberations. And so they were not just focusing on climate goals, but also looking at economic impacts and effects on people with lower incomes, which was very important to this Assembly. And third, I think it also helped in terms of the credibility and the uptake of the recommendations, because it made the feasibility and the expected impact of the work, of the results of the recommendations, much more concrete and visible. We are very happy that we've done this, and I would recommend it to anyone organizing a National Assembly. Yeah.
No, so you had a university research team working alongside you, then, did you? As ideas were emerging.
Yeah, it was an independent research organization doing the work, doing the actual assessment. Yeah. And I think it was important that it was independent researchers doing this work who have a lot of experience in doing these kind of assessments. That's helpful. And I think also it provided a great starting point for the civil servants who are now working or processing and doing the preparatory work for the government's response. Hopefully it gave them a good starting point as well.
Okay. So let's move towards that issue of response to the Assembly. And can you I saw that you had what looked like an incredibly successful launch reception, where a really impressive event. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that handover? Because you've already mentioned that you delayed the handover, or the Assembly decided to delay the handover because of the change of government. But when you did launch the report, how did you do that?
Yeah, so we wanted it to be not just a standard presentation, presenting a report like how it usually goes, with all respect. And we wanted to be in the spirit of the Assembly and of all the other meetings we had with the members. So it was more of a dialogue, and I think the Assembly members were at the center of that meeting. So they themselves told the story of their journey. And their own experiences in the Assembly. And we brought together, of course, many members of the Assembly took their day off on Monday, took a day off to come to The Hague and do that. But we had around 300 people, or over 300 people in the room. So we also invited, of course, the ministers and the newly elected members of parliament, and the media, but then also civil servants and academics, but people in business, business representatives, civil society organizations, all connected to the topics in the recommendations. And for us, it was really about getting the whole system in the room, or them being present and actually engaging in a conversation with the Assembly members. And also, we didn't only focus on the recommendations, but it was also about the process and how the recommendations were developed. And another element that I think was important, again, bringing all these different voices and perspectives into the room. So you heard different voices, different Assembly members. There was an Assembly member who shared that she was at the start very skeptical after calculating how much the participant compensation would cost, and there was someone who realized that she'd been living in this green bubble, and then another person who shared that they disagreed with a big part of the content, and but then deeply valued the process and the experience in itself. So this diversity was again really part of the launch.
It's really nice the way you've been centering that all the way through. I think that's a really important kind of thing, because you can kind of just have the Assembly thinks and not kind of like show that diversity. I think that's really good. Nienke, can I turn to you? You've all been really quiet while the other people have been speaking. My experience of spending time with the three of you is that you're not normally this well behaved. But
we try to behave now that there's other folks watching us.
We can behave. We can behave.
So Nienke, tell us a bit about the reception of the report.
Yeah.
How have different actors, politicians, stakeholders reacted, and what are your hopes that this will actually it will resonate with them?
Yeah, well, it will resonate for sure. And to elaborate on what Tobijn was telling, it's not only letting them see what we did in the Assembly, but also giving all these other people the same magical experience that we had and that participants had. And experience it for yourself is really one of the main blocks now for the upcoming year. And I think it's very important that we stay together for another year. Also with all the participants, to monitor what politics are doing, and how we can land all the recommendations in society. So I'm really hopeful that a lot of the recommendations will land either in politics or in government, or in companies, or in the society as a whole. And we had yesterday a really great meeting, and maybe Marvin will tell us a bit more about it. And Casper was there, together with more than 18 participants and the civil servants who are working now on the advice for the new cabinet, for the new government. And there was so much enthusiasm, and also they were all telling that there's so much work now. But it's really, they all felt this is the voice of Holland who is speaking, and let's really hear what that voice is telling us. So that's one of my hope. And the other thing is optimism, because We're giving, the three of us, a lot of lectures together with participants on all kind of podia at the moment. And not telling only about recommendations, but also about this culture change that is really very different in working together, a different way of communicating, a different way of collaboration, even when you don't agree. And we see that there's a lot of inspiration, not only for Dutch politics, but also for the ministries, how they can work together across the ministries and not just all in their silos, but also for companies to look at a different way how you can use collective wisdom. And I do think that we can show this as an inspiration, and a concrete example how you can work differently together, and that this is real an enrichment of democracy. And I really hope that this is not just a starting point, but it will just come blew up and really make more impact than the impact of the 13 or 23 recommendation that is in the advice, actually.
You've got big ambitions there, Nienke.
Well, I'm an optimist in everything, in every sense, and big ambitions, because otherwise we wouldn't have started in this way, and
Yeah.
we would have been here at the moment we are now. I'm convinced about that.
So just tell me, so you gave us a little flavor there of trying to create opportunities where politicians and administrators and other stakeholders are actually meeting with you and with the members. Because there is this kind of moment, isn't there, when the sort of magic of the assembly ends and it goes into traditional political and kind of administrative and sort of societal ways of doing things. Is there for you? How do you, and you're often talking to stakeholders and others who won't necessarily understand what an assembly is. I mean, assembly knowledge about. I mean, maybe in the Netherlands because it was such a maybe the attention has been more, but you know, unless people have been in the space, they don't necessarily understand it. So I'm just kind of get an understanding of how are you working with these sort of elites who don't, have got plenty of other things on their mind. Of
Yeah.
how are you bringing that culture to
I
them?
think that is one of the experiences we didn't foresee, actually, but I think for now, and Tobijn, please help me therein. I think we have more than 2 or maybe 3 podia every week where we can tell our story to politicians, to governmental organizations, to companies. And most of the speeches we do together with the participants. So they tell their experiences. And then Yannick and Tobijn give them the experience and the magical experience, how it is to really talk to each other and see what's happening then. And people really are full of energy when they leave the room and really look in a different way to the assembly and not seeing as just it was an instrument and we used it and we saw it as an experiment, but they really are infected with the magic we had this last year. And we have still time till the summer because in June the government will give their reaction and they will motivate what they are going to take with them and what not. And one of the recommendations is about this changing of the culture of doing politics and not only looking at short term but also give a long-term vision. And I'm sure that they will really say something about it, what they learned from the process we went through.
I think it's those kind of recommendations that are in some ways the potential for systems change and for different
Yeah.
ways of doing things, but are much harder to land because they don't land on one person's desk, and that's the real, I guess that's going to be the telling thing about how do they respond to something which is about their culture. I think that is really, really interesting. Listen, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I'm gonna, and well, we have, and I could continue talking to you about this for ages, but I'm gonna, I think it's actually important to hear from a member. So I'm gonna
Yes,
throw
please.
the 3 of you out and replace you with Casper. We'll bring you back in half an hour or so towards the end. If people have got any questions from what they've heard, please do throw it in. So could we bring throw the other 3 organizers out? We don't need them. Hey Casper, thank you so much for joining us today. You're on mute.
It's the
That's
classic
it. Fantastic.
one. Yes, thank you for having me. I said, yeah.
No. The pleasure is absolutely all ours. Can you tell us a bit about your background? What do you do when you're not in a citizens' assembly?
A lot, basically. I work for an organization that's for education for sustainable development. So we collaborate with schools, and in my case, mostly secondary education, to organize lessons and projects on sustainability, or, for instance, a specific nature reserve, coastal protection, and so on. So we try and design lessons or projects around those kinds of topics. And in my spare time, I'm also a council support member in my local city council. So I help my local party prepare for meetings and so on. And besides all that, I also try and be a great dad as much as I can.
So actually, we'll come back to this in a minute. So you were one of the people who came into the assembly who was actively engaged around the climate and positively, and were meeting with people from very different perspectives. So we'll hold that for a second. I'm just interested about why you decided. Well, maybe it's obvious why you decided to put your name forward, because you've got this interest in sustainability. So what was your motivation, and what was the reaction? How did you feel when you were actually invited?
The reason was indeed because I am already involved in the topic. I thought, well, on a more national scale, it's great to have your voice heard and try and change things for the better. Of course, I had to negotiate at home if I could leave for 6 weekends, but that was all fine. So that was great. So I was very excited to be part of it when they called to tell me I was one of the lucky 175. I was very excited, basically because I was able to join and participate. There's a lot of debate going on in society. And a lot of people who know a lot but don't really do anything about it. So I thought, well, you gotta put your money where your mouth is and be part of the solution. I was very happy and glad to be invited.
So tell us a bit about your experience, because it's very rare. One of the things I always stress to people about assemblies is it's very rare to be in a space which has been designed to have such diversity of people within it. I mean, we normally spend time with people like ourselves who reinforce our views. So I'm kind of interested in what was it like working with such a large and diverse group, and particularly in what we've already heard was quite a polarized context of sort of Dutch politics at the time, and maybe still is. And I just wondered how that affected you as an individual and as a group.
It can be annoying, to put it mildly, because of course you all come with your own background and your own motivation and your own set of values and frame of reference, and of course everybody thinks you hold wisdom in your hand, but being politically active also helps you to understand that there's more than one point of view to a certain topic. So that helps. But I was pleasantly surprised, especially when we got on in the process, to find that most people are convinced by facts and by data and by science, and because there is a small hardcore group that doesn't want to be convinced, and like you said, they enter the debate and they also enter the assembly because there was a small group of participants that was actively in contact with a certain climate denial groups, and you heard the standard arguments pop up every now and then, but I was pleased to see that there was a small group, and of course they sort of stuck together and they tried to get their point across, but like I said, most people were positively trying to come up with solutions, maybe not just for the climate, but for society as a whole, because it also affects our lives, our daily lives. And a lot of people just want to improve daily life, and they want to improve their surroundings. So if you make the debate a little bit bigger and try to avoid the word climate, a lot of people are open to think about solutions to improve like everyday life and everyday society.
So the idea of actually that Yannick was talking about sort of how he and others were trying to shape the space so that could happen. You felt that was successful, that it was actually a space where you could actually talk across difference, where people could actually interact with each other and share ideas across different viewpoints.
Yeah, definitely, and that was very interesting to see that whole process. And one of the activities that I'm not doing at the moment anymore, but what I was doing when I was drafted into the Assembly, I was doing a master's degree in community development, which tackled a lot of the conversation techniques and stuff like that. That was also used within the Assembly. So for me, looking at how Yannick and Nienke and Tobijn and all the facilitators used the conversation techniques to get people together and share stories and have every voice heard within the Assembly was a good thing to see. So, well, from our side as a participant, and not just from me, but assembly-wide, there was so much respect and appreciation for the role of the facilitators and Yannick and Tobijn and Nienke as the face of the organization, to make that all happen, to make it all possible. And if that organization is committed to try and create that, then I think that's the best way to start. And you could really see, like over the 6-month period or 7, or I don't know how much it was in the end, you could see that trust growing, because, like I said, in the first 1 or 2 weekends, everybody comes in with their own sort of set of values or convictions, but you could really see, because of the way the conversations were being led and facilitated, that people grew closer together, and that was really great to see.
Good. So let's go towards the end of the process. You produced this report of what you've done, and what is it that you're most proud of in terms of the outcome, or which particular recommendations were resonating with you? I'm just kind of interested to know what have you carried away from the process that you're most proud of?
Well, the politically correct answer is of course I'm proud of every recommendation that we produced, because they are all our recommendations, because we all supported them, and they are all very good recommendations, each in its own right. But I was proud to have both recommendations that I worked on personally being accepted as well. The first one was to implement a lobby paragraph or a lobby charter to every policy document that the government puts forward, so that we could, as citizens, we could see who policymakers have talked to while drafting up policy documents. And the second one was the implementation of an emission trade system for greenhouse gases for the agricultural sector, because they are currently exempt from such.
That's a controversial one.
It is, yeah. But it was widely carried within the Assembly, so that was good to hear. Good. Follow up might be a little bit more difficult, because like you said, it's a controversial one, but. That, like, being the voice of the Netherlands, in the conversations we had while drafting it, the inequality of how effects of greenhouse gases are distributed within society is something that appeals to people, because there are certain branches or certain sectors that are exempt from such trade systems, and they get to emit greenhouses to the extent that's insane, basically. And we as citizens have to pay. So the inequality factor was within the Assembly a reason enough to accept that proposal.
Okay, that's interesting.
Hopefully it lands within society and policy as well.
It's really interesting that assemblies are very often really interested in fairness and distribution. Actually, that's something that often comes up. Just a final question: what are your sort of hopes and fears for the impact of the assembly? Do you know where do you think this? Do you have a sense of where you hope this will land, or do you have any worries about how it will land now that it's out in society?
Both, basically. No, like Nienke said, we were at a meeting yesterday at the Ministry of Climate and which was it, economics, and we talked with a lot of civil servants, and they are very enthusiastic, and they embrace a lot of the recommendations. Follow up and actually implementing it into policy might be a bit harder, because a lot of the recommendations that cross like ministry walls and ministry boundaries, so they really have to work together to formulate fitting policy, and that's quite difficult. So one of my fears is that, well, it ends there, or it gets confined to one ministry, so it's in a way diluted, dilutes the recommendation in the end. But hearing civil servants talk about how enthusiastic they are and how hard they are actually working to make it all work, and getting other people involved in implementing it as well, that's really good to hear. But my biggest hope, and I think Nienke mentioned it earlier as well, is, and there's some big words, but I really hope that we, by the process that we went through, sort of help to cement the foundation of democracy. It's the feeling among people that they are not heard and not seen, and the Citizens' Assembly, with the right mandate, is a way to get people involved again, and that's, I think it's essential in this day and age. To get people back into democracy.
Yeah, that's really well said, Casper. I think it isn't just about sort of creating climate policy. It's about broader cultural change as well. I think that's really interesting.
It is, yeah.
Casper, thank you so much for your input. We're going to pull you back in about 15 minutes for the panel, but thank you for telling us about your experience. It's been really, really interesting.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So my last guest, or our last guest, is Marvin Tiemessen from the Ministry of Climate Policy and Green Growth. So it's all your responsibility now, Marvin.
Yes.
So
all on my shoulders now.
Yeah. So as I said at the start, I don't think there has been another assembly where there has been so much preparation work, in the sense of, I think there was 2 years where the administration was scoping out the idea of an assembly and was talking about it, and even then was talking about sort of how do we follow up. So I'm kind of interested, how much preparation was there to receive the recommendations prior to the report actually arriving?
Well, I think we've done a lot of things since basically 2020. We've put in an infrastructure for a good follow-up, as Nienke and Tobijn mentioned, such as the promise to respond within 6 months to the reports, to explain why we will take over or deny different recommendations. I think those have been anchored very, very heavily, and that helps us to this day, actually. We've also, in developing the remits, we've also organized with different ministries. So there's a broad base of support of this assembly. I think that's also really important.
Can I just stop you there? Because there were two ministries that were particularly responsible for the commissioning. But you've actually worked really hard to try and bring other ministries into the process, yeah?
Yes, because in the end, we knew our minister would be on climate, but the remit is also about eating food and the food system, and that's a whole different other ministry. So you need to have them on board as well, because otherwise it will land flat. And yeah, we've learned, I think, from different past assemblies that it will be even harder when you just receive the advice.
So when you say you actually created structures across, so is this particular, sorry if I'm being very nerdy, but I'm really interested. Is this particular people in each ministry with responsibility for, if you like, advocating for the assembly within it? Is it about providing information to civil servants who wouldn't otherwise know about it? Have there been information? I'm just kind of interested the kind of activities and the kind of responsibilities that are in place.
Well, I think you can make a distinction between before the assembly, during the assembly, and after the assembly. Before, we discussed what kind of questions would look like, what kind of policy should we ask a question about, what kind of policy is not really good for a citizen assembly. And then during that process, everyone was already getting more familiar with an assembly on its own. So I think that helps. And we've set in not only on the civil servant level, on the policy officer level, but also on the higher regions, the top civil servants as well. So I think we've created multiple layers to have this structure. Moreover, even during the assembly, people we've been working with for the past 2 years were also present and also had a role as bringing information on the table next to for example, academic experts to have more of a policy insight. And I think that also really helps in actually getting more familiar on one hand with the assembly, but also getting to know what kind of questions the participants are having. So we know, we found out, oh, this ministry is not involved yet. We need to involve them because we've heard things that might land in the advice and we are not prepared for that. So I think that really helps. And we've been in very close contact with Tobijn, Nienke, Yannick on the whole process. And I think that really helps. And we've not just let them go in that sense, but it was always looking for how we can they are independent, but we need each other in the end when we want to follow up on this advice.
Okay. So do you know precisely how you're going to report back, what format that's going to look like, or is that still up for discussion at the moment?
It's still up for discussion, but we have an outline, of course, already 1 year in my head somewhere. But I think, of course, we have to respond to each recommendation, especially the 13 that has had this majority vote of 75% support in the assembly. It will be 11 to Parliament, but well, usually the letters that are sent by my colleagues are very long and windy and having very technical language. We would like to step away from that. So ideally, the assembly members on their own can read it and know what has been done with it. That's an ideal, but in reality, I think it will be still very hard to deliver on that. Yannick was very proud. He said, well, we've kept down the number of recommendations to a low level, but in each recommendation, there are maybe even 7, 8, 10 sub-recommendations. So
a bit of cheating going on.
It's a bit of cheating, but on the other hand, it has a layer. Like Yannick said, the assembly said, where do we want to go and how can we possibly do that? And we want to react on the direction the assembly wants us to go, but also on the different sub-recommendations. So So that also really helps us on these different kind of layers. Moreover, we would like to make like something like an infographic on giving participants an overview of what are we doing and how long it will take, and also help them in monitoring how we're doing. I think that's a bit of good governance that we would like to do.
So in some situations, what I've found is a lot of government effort up to that sort of 6 month, a year when you report, and then everyone goes back to their day jobs. So have you actually got sort of, is there some sort of task force or group who are taking responsibility of? I understand what you're saying, people outside being able to monitor, but within administration, actually this becoming part of your work program, if you like. So are there particular people who will carry on after that 6 months, if you like, beating the drum for the Assembly within the administration?
I think we've discussed that, and I think that's one possibility we haven't looked into further, because maybe you know, but also the government has to shrink in the number of people we're doing, or the number of people we have in the government. But one thing we are doing yearly is making different policy on climate every year and try to search money for it. And we want to land those different recommendations in that yearly cycle, so that it will become part of the normal work everyone has been doing for the past years on this climate cycle. And in that sense, we hope it will save some time and also be able to implement even when I am gone or others are not working here anymore. So that's a really challenge on how to get into this cycle. The recommendations are different than we're used to. So that's
citizens always write differently from administrators. It's just a truth, and that translation is the real challenge. So obviously that you've been preparing this for, not you personally, but maybe you have, but for like 6 years of kind of work since it was first being scoped. But of course, during that time, we've seen governments come and go, and now you have a new government. I'm not sure how much you can say about this, but is that fact that you've got a new government, is that affecting your response to the Assembly? Because it's one thing for you as administrators, but then you also have to have political sign off, and then we've got a new group of political actors in there. Is that creating problems for you, or is that actually creating opportunities for you?
Well, to start off, we are very happy we have a government right now with mandate. So that is nice, because we could have been with 6 more months of government forming, and we couldn't really then have a real response to the policy or to the advice. So we're happy we have a government. I think it's hard for us because the coalition partners don't have a majority in the parliament. So we will not fully know how much support we will get, and maybe ministers will get cautious to experiment too much. And the timeline itself is very tight, because we really have to inform our ministers again and again on what a climate assembly is. So you start back almost from scratch again, and that makes it different or very difficult for us. But I guess one part is that on using more sustainably stuff like the circular economy is also moving to our minister. So we have one less minister of all the cabinet to worry about, because that's the same person who will be responsible for climate as well. So that's a plus, definitely, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I think the sort of the changing nature of minister, I mean, regardless of whether you've got what's been the sort of instability you've had in the Netherlands, the amount of turnover there is of ministers, I think, is always
Yeah, and also of parliaments, because we've had also different parliaments, and not even the shift in different parties, but also the people within those parties also regularly change. So that memory fades very, very fast, and that makes it difficult to have people really wanting this thing to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the kind of thing that Tobijn and Nienke and Yannick were talking about, trying to recreate those moments for people, is really is really critical.
Yes, but the assembly is over, so you can't do everything over. So that's the difficulty of it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, I recognize that. Listen, Marvin, thank you so much for that. Stay with us, because I'm going to get the other four back in now, just for the last sort of 15 minutes or so. This has been such an interesting conversation. I could talk about the Dutch Assembly for hours. I probably do to my wife. I probably bore her to death, but about it. But we got Yannick as well. That's great. So we've had a couple of questions in. One of them was a very specific question about how. So it was mentioned by all of you that there were people who came from a sort of climate skeptic or a climate denial perspective. How did you, what question or what questions did you use to get them in the room? Can any of you, Tobijn, can you remember the? Oh, you got it.
Yes, sir. Yes, definitely. So we made sure to send 70,000 invitations, so to make sure there was enough people from different perspectives actually receive them, and then people could register upon receiving the personal invitation. And the ones who registered, we asked them whether they were worried about climate change and to what extent. So we had 4 categories, and we also asked them whether their view on climate policy, whether there should be more or less, basically.
Okay.
You put climate policies, and we did a representative poll in the Netherlands to make sure that we had representative data to compare that to, and then it became part of the second step in our sortition, basically. Yeah.
So I've seen in the UK we've used level of concern, but not used the attitude towards climate policy. That's really interesting. Okay, and a follow-up question on that, which I guess, did you see much change of opinion either from sort of skeptics who became less skeptical, or I suppose others from the other direction as well? I mean, or do you feel it was? I'm just kind of get a sense as to whether there were changes of viewpoint or perspective. It's hard to understand. I mean, Yannick, you were working with these people very, very closely. Did you see people's orientation towards climate policy shift at all, or not?
I think we don't have the numbers of that yet. I think there has been, but I'm also looking at Tobijn and Nienke, but there is like the independent researchers have actually done all of the research on that. So I think we can definitely give you some numbers. So this is all. So I don't have an answer to that specific question. So this is a hunch, or this is just my own perspective on this, right? But I guess the thing was also it was never our aim to change people's opinion around the climate, right? So I think that's just important to note. I think some people might have shifted a bit. They might have become more nuanced. I guess the thing that I think happened more is that people have more understanding for each other, and that people have increased capacity to see different perspectives. And that doesn't necessarily mean that folks change their own perspective, but there is a flexibility, and I guess that's the thing for me, that's what I aim for. Like it's not like the purpose of it is not to change people's mind, I think, but just to have a deeper, better, more nuanced understanding. And I think that works in both ways. Like it doesn't only happen in one direction.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think Casper, you were kind of saying that yourself, weren't you, about sort of like that sort of it sort of enriched your perspective and enriched your understanding. Yeah, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Talking to each other creates understanding, and if you understand each other and you understand where someone else is coming from and what the background is and what their motivation is for participating. You take that into account when you try and draft up a recommendation. And if you understand why something is important to someone else, you try and take it into consideration in your own choices. So that helps, and that's also one of the added bonuses for us as participants, spending weekends together, not only during the assembly times, but also afterwards, because we often stayed in a large group in a hotel as well. So we had some like social time as well together. So that helps you to create more like a social connection as well. And that social connection is the start of understanding each other, and understanding each other is the start of progress, basically.
No, one of my friends talks about assemblies. He uses the terms, he talks to them about anti-polarization machines. They're actually spaces within which you can talk across difference in the way that you can't, like on social media or things like that. I think that actually we can really underestimate that, spending time with each other and hearing from each other. I think that's really, really critical. A couple of things have just popped up. I'm trying to capture them. So I don't know if Yannick or Tobijn or Nienke wants to pick up, or even Casper, about this issue of the sort of, which I picked up on, about the knowledge and expertise. Do you think that actually created a richness, or did it distract from the work? You know, the fact that there were these different perspectives being heard. Was that part of the richness of the process, or did that actually potentially cause tensions, having people, if you like, contradict each other, etc.? Tobijn, Yannick, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, no, I think it really contributed. It was at the core of this process. And so by going through that and by doing that and by inviting all these different perspectives into the space and into the conversations, and the members doing that themselves, I think that was at the heart of this process, and it was really important. And it, as Yannick said, it was an important step in the process as well. I think it also brought legitimacy. Before, you asked about how the outside world sort of looked on bringing these different voices into the assembly. I think it was critical that the assembly members did the actual selection, but also, for in current society, this is. It was clear that the assembly members were actually representative of how people in the Netherlands look at these issues, and that's why it was very important.
This issue about sort of skepticism and denial and different types of knowledge is really, obviously, we should have a learning call on this. I think actually we should have a workshop on this in particular. But it's really interesting. It was something Casper mentioned about. Sorry, Nienke, did you want to say something?
Maybe I can add that because I also saw in one of the questions on media that we had, after a long conversation, had journalists from two different media at every assembly, of every meeting. And so there was also coverage of this discussion with the different approaches on knowledge. Was transparent for the whole of society. And I think that's also very important, that it not only is very important for the assembly itself, but having a good media coverage is also good for transparency and communication with the rest of society.
Yeah, no, you put quite a lot of resources into that, I think, didn't you? I think dedicated resources to that. I'm only running on this because it's appearing in the chat. I think people are just really interested about how you managed it. Casper mentioned that occasionally the sort of climate skeptics or climate deniers would band together. And was this, if someone's asking, was this a problem of sort of a facilitation problem about, and did this mean that they didn't buy into the process necessarily? My understanding is that even most of the skeptics in the room really recognize the value of the process, even if they still held those positions. Is that right, Yannick?
I think so for most of them. And of course, as with every process, there were a couple of folks that couldn't, or but I guess in general most of them did. And I guess the other piece, I also read the question, and I think at times within a process, it is fine for folks to come together who share a certain perspectives.
Yeah.
It also means safety. It means that you can be together with the folks that share your perspective. And at times, the tension that you want to navigate is this thing around familiarity of perspectives and diversity of perspectives, right? And you want to make sure that you don't lean towards either one of them in not in the right kind of sequence or in the right kind of amount, right? So you want to balance how folks gather together with folks that are like-minded and stuff, and that is totally fine. And so you also want to break that, and you also want to make sure that folks have conversations with different people all the time, but you also don't want that to happen all the time, right? So I guess one of the things that we also did in terms of how to work on the recommendations, we kind of had some ground rules that help folks to self-organize. So one of the ground rules that we had in terms of if you are working on a certain recommendation, as a group, you must have at least 2 people who have been working on this recommendation before, and you need to have at least 2 people who are new to this recommendation, right? So that's how you then make sure that you both have continuation of conversation and safety of perspectives, and at the same time you create newness. And I think that's on a general level what we try to do constantly, to make sure that people feel safe enough and get to be with the folks that think alike, and at the same time have opportunity to be challenged in their own thinking. And I guess that's a balancing act in the facilitation, right?
Yeah, and it's a judgment, isn't it? It's a judgment call about when you need to do that, and that's what makes a good facilitator. So yeah, absolutely. There was a question in there about use of technology. Tobijn, did you use technology at all? Kind of like, in terms of trying to get wider engagement, or were you kind of like, it was much more about the face-to-face? Did assembly members have some sort of technology platform they were operating with?
Inside the assembly
Inside the assembly and externally, both of those things, yeah.
Yeah, I think Nienke stepped in, but we had a platform for the online platform for the participant or the assembly members. I think a lot of the work we did inside the assembly, but Yannick, perhaps I'm forgetting something, but it was like old school, just meeting, being in a space physically and working together. But then we did a public survey, which was quite, in a sense, it was different. It was online, but there we asked, so we made sure we found it important to engaging the wider audience, like the public. That's always a challenge, right? But so we thought it was important to allow them to share what they found was important. So we focused more on values, and they were allowed to do that through an online survey. But I'm looking at Nienke and Yannick. Am I forgetting something? So no, and we're not allowed as a government to use AI or something. So we were also quite limited in using super cool new tools.
Yeah, but
super cool new tools may not always be the best thing.
Yeah. And maybe to add is that we not only had the platform for our participants, but actually everything which was supported for the participants on knowledge was also transparent for the rest of the society. So we shared every knowledge with everybody in the Netherlands, so everybody could see what was happening there. And after every weekend, we had a small a video what happened in that weekend, so people really could follow what was happening.
No,
and I think it is key that you need this personal touch. You cannot solve problems like this just with technology. Technology can facilitate, but the human connection is the most important.
I 100% agree. It's really difficult when you think about scaling these things up, because that is such an important thing. Right, we're just coming to the end, so I'm going to give you. This is an unfair question. No, it's a nice way to end, I think. So 30 seconds each on what was your favorite moment of the assembly. I always like to just get a little flavor of this. So Nienke, what was your favorite moment?
Well, my favorite moment was in the seventh meeting, when we concluded the whole advice with enormous applause of all the participants. It was really goose popping when
goosebumps. Yeah.
Yes, that's the right word. So
Yeah.
I think that's my favorite moment.
Okay, Marvin, do you have a favorite moment? The process hasn't happened yet because you haven't delivered on it. So come
Well,
on.
I've been at the assembly itself, and at the sixth meeting, it was supposed to be the last. Everyone was sharing how they have lived through this experience, and some older lady shared how she wasn't seen during her life, and in this assembly she was, and that really touched my heart.
Marvin, you're almost making me cry then. I know those moments in assemblies, and it's just like, yeah, if you don't cry at an assembly, then there's something wrong with you. Casper, what was your favorite moment, would you say?
It wouldn't be one particular moment. It was a highlight reel basically, and of all those moments, like we talked about, that people felt heard and seen, and they got to contribute, and from whichever way of life they come from, they are being valued for who they are, and that their opinions are being heard and seen, and being valued, and that is. Like we said before, that's how we get people to participate, and every weekend we had those moments. So every weekend there was a highlight at some point. So it wouldn't be one particular one, but like I said, it's a collection of moments, and I really will cherish this for years to come, and probably for the rest of my life, because yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I really hope that we get more of these assemblies in the Netherlands in the years to come. Albeit national or local, and we hope, and I hope that we get to contribute in getting more people involved in assemblies like this.
No, well said. Yannick?
I guess it was
no one said when I came to visit the assembly. No one said that. As
You still have Tobijn left, so nice prompt here, Graham. No, I think it was during the fourth weekend, which was intentionally designed somewhere different, out in nature. And we did an exercise which is called All That We Share. And we had folks sitting in different age categories. And then people need to come and stand into the circle if something applies to them. And so we would ask, come stand into the circle if you have one or more tattoos. And you would see different folks from different age range come stand into the circle. And then we ask, come stand into the circle if you like to dance. And then it happened. And come stand into the circle if you have a medical or physical condition that limits your participation in society. And you can see the energy shift, right? And so that was one of the ways where we played with similarities and differences that I think shifted something. But there was one question that I asked where I said, come stand into the circle if you have felt a bit lonely during these assemblies, and if you need a little bit more company. And nobody came and stand into the circle. So I was standing there by myself, but then my good friend Casper came up to me and gave me a big, he's quite a tall guy, I'm quite short, and he gave me a big, massive hug in the center of the circle. And I think that is a moment that I will carry with me.
Casper, you made his moment. That's great. And Tobijn, what was your moment? If you've been with this process longer than anyone else.
I think it was when you came in, Graham, and you told everyone, use your voice. It was I think that was one of the great moments. Unique, still the moment that I was going to share. So I think it was one of the moments was when the 18th of January, the first meeting, and the doors opened, and the members of the assembly actually came walking in. And we were, after all this work of so many people, not just me, so many people before me, around us, people that are not in this space, they've worked so hard to convene this and really make it. There was one chance. If we need to get it right this time, if we want to strengthen democracy, if we want to give assemblies a real shot in the Netherlands, and then all these brave people came walking in by themselves, committing to this new big thing, and I think that was very touching. Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much, everybody. I've run over time slightly because it's such an interesting story. I'd like to thank Casper and Marvin and Nienke and Tobijn and Yannick for being so open with us today, and just for the fantastic work that they've done, and all the other people who are around the Assembly, because this is just only a snapshot, obviously, of the both the Assembly itself and the wider population around it. I would look forward to having conversations with you over the coming months as to see what's happening, because if something is going to happen, you've created a really amazing bedrock for it. So thank you, all of you.
And Graham, if I may, can I say that we're writing up everything that we've done, and then the next challenge is to get it translated into English. But then, so many, if people are interested, they can read more about how we have done this, because we love to share those lessons learned and experiences.
That's fantastic. And as soon as we enable that to happen, we'll share that through Knoca. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for the participants. Thank you for your questions, etc. At the moment, we haven't got a next event plan, but as soon as we have, we will let you know. That's for me, that's just been a really fascinating story. I think there's lots for us to pick apart from there, particularly how they dealt with the issues of polarization, both outside and within the Assembly, and how the Assembly methodology seemed to be able to hold that polarization and if you like, embrace it and use it as a resource event. So it's been a really fantastic learning call. Thanks again to everybody who's involved, and I'll see you all next time. You take care.